In this video, I want to show you all promising underdogs, the best inexpensive favorites, and the best bets to consider for this weekend. I'll also provide my final probability for each fighter's victory, along with their stat differentials. If you find this informative, helpful, or entertaining, please like and subscribe. It really helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me there. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier. The premium tier gives you early access to all of the analysis and results from my videos, along with the additional data analysis and stats. This includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and deep dives into each fighter's record and historical fights. So you'll get to see their strengths, their weaknesses, their consistency across different stats, and their stat comparisons versus all of their historical opponents' averages. All of this combined will help you with your picks and bets. There's a $20 a month tier, which is around $5 per event, and you can also purchase each of these separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping with the improvement and expansion of the content for this channel. Running this data, analysis, and prediction models takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you can show. And thank you to everyone who has shown me support recently. Also, if you like detailed breakdowns and predictions, I do those weekly for full cards as well, including prelim fights, so feel free to check those out on my channel. Let's go ahead and jump right in. First, let's take a look at promising underdogs. The fighters' names are on the leftmost column, followed by their probability of victory that I presented in the prediction video from earlier this week. These probabilities are not only based on several data science prediction models that are trained for accuracy, but also on qualitative information such as the fighter's momentum, their recent performances, their career's trajectory, psychological factors, their training camps, their weight cuts, and any other available information out there. I've also provided the stat advantages for each fighter compared to their opponent, excluding differentials where one of the fighters has a 0 in their stats in order to avoid misleading information. Alright guys, happy Friday. I hope you all have had a wonderful week as we lead into UFC 305. I'm super excited for this card, excited to show some value for you guys and highlight all the opportunities here. So without further ado, let's start with the first promising underdog that I want to highlight for you guys. And this guy's actually not an underdog. The odds are really weird in this fight. It's the main event, Dricus Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Now Dricus, he opened up as an underdog, but currently the way that their odds stand, they are even going into this fight. They are both at about -110 in American odds. So let's talk about why Dricus Plessis has some value here going into this fight. First, let's talk stats. Dricus Plessis, he's 5 years younger than Israel Adesanya in this matchup. He lands 2.56 more strikes per minute than Adesanya does. He has a 2% higher striking accuracy, and he lands 2.95 more takedowns on average. He has a 37% higher takedown accuracy, and he lands 0.7 more submissions on average. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Dricus Plessis a 50.1% probability of victory, and that absolutely means that this fight is a toss-up because there's so many factors when breaking down this fight and these two fighters and the changes that have happened within this division for each individual fighter, their improvements. There's so many factors going into this that this truly is a toss-up. We don't know what version of Israel Adesanya we're going to see. We know what he's capable of and what he's accomplished before, but we also know that Dricus Plessis has been on the rise and he's done very well, even against some of the guys that Israel Adesanya himself has struggled against. Now, Dricus Plessis hasn't faced someone like Alex Pereira, but he has faced a very pressure and tough style fighter like Sean Strickland, someone who Israel Adesanya has struggled with. So we're dealing with two very high level fighters, both capable of improving and adapting their game constantly, and we don't have all of the insider information that we need to really be able to give someone a strong advantage here. So because it's a toss-up, there's a lot of value, first of all, in both guys, depending on who you personally think is doing better. But I'll give you the reason why I'm leaning towards Dricus Plessis. Even though it's 0.1% more, I'll still give you the reason as to why I'm kind of just leaning towards him a little bit more. For starters, let's break down the guy's record. So he's won 21 fights. He's finished 91% of his 21 wins. He's had 7 UFC fights. And sometimes I know Dricus is the kind of guy where if you don't pay too close attention to MMA, you know, it might be a little bit shocking to understand that he's had 7 fights within the UFC itself. He feels a little bit like a new-ish name and a new face within this division, but he's kind of sneakily been climbing up and doing really, really well. He's had 7 fights in the UFC, and he's done very well in all of them. He's won all 7 of those UFC level fights climbing up the rankings against tough opponents. Now, recently he's been on a tear. He's on a 9-fight win streak. Momentum is on this guy's side. He continuously is improving. He's in the prime of his professional fighting career. I mean, this is the Dricus du Plessis prime. So here's the thing. One last thing that I want to mention when it comes to his record. The last time that Dricus du Plessis lost was 2018, 6 years ago, before anything and everything that was relevant in the last 6 years. The guy lost 6 years ago. It's been a very long time since he's tasted defeat, and he's done very well within the UFC. But there's a lot going into this fight. Let's talk about stylistic advantages of both fighters, what their game plans should be and will be, and why Dricus du Plessis has a sliver of a better chance of coming out with the victory. So first thing that I want to highlight when it comes to Dricus du Plessis, he loves utilizing offensive grappling. He has a very strong grappling game. He averages a lot of takedown attempts per round, and he has a pretty decent success rate with those as well. He's able to land about half of those takedowns when he utilizes them in his game plan. And the reason that that could be absolutely crucial against a fighter like Israel Adesanya is because of Israel Adesanya's background. If you know Israel Adesanya's history, he was a very talented kickboxer, one of the best in the world. He has a very solid striking background, but he's not as experienced when it comes to grappling or takedown defense or even implementing takedowns in his offense. That's not a huge part of his game plan. He's primarily a striker, and he's wonderful at striking. I mean, no diss to the guy. I'm not hating on him. But Dricus du Plessis, here's where he has a very strong strength that he can use against Israel Adesanya, and we've seen that time and time again. A guy who knows a decent amount of grappling versus a guy who's primarily a striker. The striker is going to be in a little bit of trouble when it comes to those scrambles. So that's one thing. The next thing that you want to keep in mind is control time. When it comes to being on the ground, du Plessis, he's pretty good at maintaining control, and I think that if he gets Adesanya to the ground, he will be able to hold him down and maintain control for extended periods throughout those 5 rounds. Now, in previous fights, he has shown the ability to overpower his opponents, and not only is this guy good when it comes to grappling, but let's talk about his striking and his pressure. He has very powerful striking as well, which with his grappling is a deadly combination as a fighter. Now, here's the thing. Adesanya is the more technical striker. Du Plessis, he has more power when it comes to his hands and legs. This is a very interesting matchup, especially if you're a huge fan of MMA or fighting in general. I mean, these are definitely some of the best guys in this division. Now, he's going to look for opportunities to land some of those very powerful strikes that we've seen him throw time and time again throughout a fight, especially if he's able to close that distance that Adesanya creates and manages so well throughout fights. And it even causes Adesanya's fights to be a little bit boring sometimes. Here's the thing. Contender Adesanya, or the Israel Adesanya we saw leading up to the title, and for some of you that are new, just understand what I'm about to say. Israel Adesanya chasing that title was a completely different fighter than Israel Adesanya after he got his championship. How? It's his fighting style and his game plan. Once Israel became champion, he utilized, and it's intelligent but very boring for some of those casual styled fans, but if you've seen the sport for a while, you totally understand the game plan. He slows the fight down. He goes the 5 rounds. He picks his opponents apart piece by piece. He maintains that distance. He throws the hesitations to throw you off. He looks for those opportunities. He's not aggressive. If you want to see an aggressive Israel Adesanya, you watch him chasing after the title. So I don't think that we're going to get that version of Israel Adesanya. We're going to get a very technical and slow-paced Adesanya, and we're going to get a extremely aggressive and also, a methodical Dricus du Plessis. But Dricus du Plessis is able to throw those powerful shots. He has the endurance to go all 5 rounds, keep that pace up, and continue that pressure fighting. And I think that that's going to make the fight a little bit uncomfortable for Adesanya. We saw that happen when he faced someone like Sean Strickland, someone with good cardio or good endurance. He took it all 5 rounds, right? And he was able to keep the pace on Adesanya. So just to summarize so far what we've talked about, Dricus du Plessis, I like his offensive grappling. I like his ability to maintain lengthy control time. I like his powerful striking. And I like the fact that he's a pressure fighter. He has good endurance. Now here's the thing. Let's talk about Israel Adesanya's recent form. He's been a little bit vulnerable recently. And I don't want to judge him just based off of that fight with Sean Strickland. I mean, I think that that's a little bit harsh. We don't know where he was coming into that fight, and he's an extremely active fighter. We see him time and time again. But he did not look good in that Sean Strickland fight. He definitely did not look good. And Sean Strickland, no offense to anyone who loves Sean Strickland, and I'm included in that. I do like Sean Strickland as a fighter. Sean Strickland is not the most technical guy. He's just a guy who can scrap. He loves to fight, and he's just a violent, crazy guy. I love him. But Israel Adesanya, a technical striker, should not have struggled against a guy like that. So here's the thing. We've seen some cracks with Israel Adesanya. We've seen him face some mental and physical pressure. So what does this mean for Dricus du Plessis? I think he's going to go in there mixing up all of his techniques to just outclass and overpower Israel Adesanya. Now, there is a good chance that Israel Adesanya can flip the script and improve his overall game. He took some time to rest. Maybe he's a new and improved fighter. But Dricus du Plessis, based on what we've seen, we have to go based off of logic here, not just solely potential. Dricus du Plessis, he's not going to rely solely on one aspect of his game. I think he's going to approach, he's going to have a style that combines striking, grappling, and maybe some of that clinch work that's going to keep Adesanya guessing and be a little bit off balance. And Adesanya will have to be a little bit aggressive when it comes to a guy like Dricus du Plessis. He's going to have to adapt throughout the fight. And I just don't think that Adesanya is as well-rounded as we've seen Dricus du Plessis against some of those opponents. If Israel Adesanya wants to win, he has to focus on keeping the fight standing and utilizing his reach to outstrike du Plessis from a distance, a healthy distance that we've seen him utilize time and time again throughout multiple championship level fights. Now, Israel Adesanya, one thing I will say about him, the guy is an insanely good counter striker. We've seen that time and time again, and in fact, that's what got him the victory against Alex Pereira. So he's proven that ability. Now, he's going to have to exploit du Plessis' tendency that he has to leave a little bit of openings in his fighting due to his very aggressive attacks. When Dricus du Plessis fights, and you could rewatch any of his fights and you'll pick this off pretty easily. When he fights and he's throwing some of those shots and he's swinging with a lot of power using his back, his chest, his shoulders, putting everything into those punches, he's leaving himself a little bit open. And what do you do with a guy who's super fast, super precise, deadly with the striking, and has a world championship level kickboxing background? Well, that's extremely dangerous. So Adesanya, his path to victory would be that superior striking and that experience that he has, as well as the rest that he's coming in with to get this victory. But Dricus du Plessis, he's likely going to capitalize on his grappling skills. He's going to use that relentless pressure, and that's just going to disrupt Adesanya's rhythm. He's going to be able to close that distance due to that pressure, and he's going to keep attempting takedowns here and there, keeping Adesanya frustrated and kind of ruining his slow and steady game plan when it comes to championship level fights. All I know is Israel Adesanya cannot be championship level Israel Adesanya when it comes to this fight. He's going to have to make it dirty and nasty. He's going to have to approach Dricus du Plessis and try to beat him at his own game with the aggression, kind of backing him off a little bit. That's what you do. You scare the pressure style fighters. You jab them relentlessly. Even if you get hit a few times, you throw that jab out there and kind of stop them in their tracks so they slow down with the pressure, and they're like, oh, they have to be able to respect you as a fighter. And if they're just walking you down the entire fight like Sean Strickland walked down Izzy, it's not going to fare well for Israel Adesanya. And I usually don't talk about what happens in press conferences and things like that, but I think that this one was a little bit personal. You saw Dricus du Plessis talking to Israel Adesanya, and they started going back and forth a little bit, and you saw an emotional Israel Adesanya. And hey, look, that's fine. I'm not judging him here, but the thing is, that means that Dricus du Plessis is getting to Adesanya a little bit. And does that affect Israel Adesanya and his game plan? It could do one of two things that we've seen time and time again in fights, and that's the beauty of it. You're either going to take that emotion, get aggressive, and use it to fuel you, or it's going to create this little doubt in you. Now, some of the fighters we've seen that take that emotion and they absolutely excel. are Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali. Those are prime fighters. Or you could even consider George St. Pierre. When he lost, he said that that was his biggest humiliation of his life, and he came back and he earned his redemption against Serra in that rematch at UFC 83. And I know I sound really old when I'm saying this, but it's a great example. You also have guys like Michael Bisping that do really well with using anger and frustration to fuel performances. Now, there's a few fighters that take that emotion and it ends up just getting in their head a little bit too much. For example, Dustin Poirier, I remember this very clearly. When Dustin Poirier, a very young Poirier, faced a very young McGregor, you could tell that McGregor got into Poirier's head. And he really crawled in there and he gave Poirier some doubt. Poirier was walking around, he's like, man, I've never hated anybody more than Conor McGregor in my life. That emotion, it didn't fare well for him in that fight. And we also saw a lot of that with Daniel Cormier. He was extremely emotional in that rivalry against John Jones. How could you not be, right? John Jones, a master class at psychological warfare, which is huge when it comes to being an intimidating fighter and earning that psychological edge. Look, there's a direct line that's going on. Dricus du Plessis is playing mind games with Israel Adesanya, and we have to see how that plays out for Israel Adesanya. Now, here's the thing. Israel Adesanya, he did use emotions to overcome that the challenge of Alex Pereira. He had lost a few of those fights that they first fought, and that was on his mind. It was weighing heavy on him, and it kind of ruined his motivation and stuff, or it ruined his momentum coming into that fight. But he used it as fuel. He was actually able to draw out a very clever trap for Alex Pereira. He kind of draws him in. If you look back at that fight and towards the very end, right before he gets the victory, he draws Alex Pereira in. He kind of fakes being injured, and then he looks for that counter opportunity in the pocket. Incredibly intelligent when it comes to two world-class kickboxers. So the whole point is, Israel Adesanya, we have to see how he's using emotions. Now, it didn't look too well in the press conference. I mean, it looked like it really got to Israel Adesanya. I just hope that he's going to come in extremely focused, but I've seen this play out before, and so far, based on not only strategic analysis, not only statistical analysis and the prediction models, but even psychologically, I really like where Dricus du Plessis is at in this fight. And again, I'm making this giant case to just justify my 0.1% leaning towards Dricus du Plessis. And here's the thing, that's what you have to end up doing. You have to make a solid case when it comes to a fighter like Israel Adesanya. The truth is, this fight is 50-50. And if you want some value, you could go with either guy here. I ended up choosing Dricus du Plessis. I think there's a lot more pieces to his game that are leaning towards his favor than for Israel Adesanya. But Israel Adesanya, he's a dog. So this fight's going to be a toss-up. It's going to be a very entertaining fight, very fulfilling fight. And whoever wins out of that will truly be one of the best guys in this division for a long, long time. So for the next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you all on this packed and stacked card, it is Kai Kara-France. Kai Kara-France has a reach advantage of 1 inch in this fight. He lands 0.06 more strikes per minute. He absorbs 0.96 less strikes per minute. He has a 13% higher striking defense and a 7% higher takedown accuracy, and he also has a 28% higher takedown defense than his opponent, Steve Erceg, in this fight. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Kai Kara-France a 41% probability of victory in his matchup against Steve Erceg, and both fighters are very, very talented. They both have different strengths coming into this fight. And I think that 41%, even though I am leaning towards Steve Erceg to pull off that win, I think that Kai Kara-France is almost equally able to pull off a win in this co-main event. First, let's talk Kai Kara-France's record. He's won 24 fights. He's finished 58% of those fights. He's had 11 fights within the UFC, and he's won 7 of them. So that's extremely impressive, not only when it comes to the winning percentage, but when it comes to the amount of experience that this guy has in the UFC. Now, recently, he has not done too bad. He's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but as a user in my comment section mentioned, a very good follower of mine, I consider her to be a friend, it's AWH8995. She mentioned, hey, you can't knock Kai Kara-France either. He was kind of robbed in his last fight, and I think that she's absolutely correct when it comes to that analysis. First, let's break down that previous fight that Kai Kara-France had with Amir Albazi, that a lot of people said was a robbery. Kai Kara-France, in that fight against Amir Albazi, he threw 323 total strikes. I want you to really understand how massive that number is for one fight. He threw 323 fights and he landed 133 of them. Here's the thing, Amir Albazi, he threw 173, half. He threw half of what Kai Kara-France threw in that fight, and he only landed 64. Now let's break down those significant strikes. Kai Kara-France, he threw 283 significant strikes out of his 323 total strikes in that fight alone. 283 significant strikes he threw, and he landed 99 of those. Amir Albazi, he threw 145 significant strikes and only landed 43. Let's talk about strikes to the head. Kai Kara-France, 224 strikes to the head, landed 57. Amir Albazi, 125, he landed 31. Let's talk about body shots. 30 body shots Kai Kara-France threw against Amir Albazi. He landed 20 of those. Amir Albazi, he threw 13 at Kai Kara-France. He only landed 6 of those. Let's talk about strikes to the legs. 29 strikes to the legs Kai Kara-France threw against Albazi. He landed 22 of those out of the 29. Albazi, he threw 7. He landed 6 of those. But let's talk about control. Now here's where Amir Albazi takes this fight, or at least, takes an advantage in this fight. He controlled the fight for 6 minutes and 10 seconds, while Kai Kara-France only controlled the fight for 58 seconds. But let's talk about takedowns. Kai Kara-France, he threw 2 takedowns. He landed 2 takedowns, 100% takedown rate. Amir Albazi, he shot for 9. He only got 1 of them. And he also did that submission attempt. This one ended up going to the judges. It was a split decision. Kai Kara-France, you could arguably say, and you would probably win this case more times than you won't, Kai Kara-France hasn't won 3 out of his last 5 fights. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights. And I know I went off a little bit on a tangent, started breaking down some stats in a previous fight, but I think that context is absolutely crucial because I made a mistake in my last video. I take accountability. I said Kai Kara-France has only won 3 out of his last 5 fights. No, the guy's actually won 4 out of his last 5 fights. And shout out to that user for mentioning that. He's not coming off of a 2-fight losing streak, although it might seem like that on paper. Kai Kara-France has only lost 1 fight, and he had a very poor split decision. So let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone as to why Kai Kara-France has advantages over a fighter like Steve Erceg. Now here's the thing, Steve Erceg is a whole different challenge than Amir Albazi, and that's where we can't only take the previous fight into account. We have to look at both of these fighters and what they're going to bring. And we definitely have to refer to Steve Erceg's his performance in that previous fight against Alexandre Pantoja. Now here's the things that I want to mention for Kai Kara-France. Kai Kara-France, I really want to highlight his striking power and his speed. He's known for his speed and his power when it comes to striking, and I think that will be an advantage in this fight when it comes to those stand-up exchanges. Steve Erceg is a little bit more technical and he's patient. Kai Kara-France is not patient. He's vicious when it comes to fighting. He's really, really good and aggressive when it comes to fighting. And his ability to land some of those powerful strikes extremely quickly, if you see his kicks, they're insane. I think that can quickly build up and change the momentum of this fight in his favor, even though he's the underdog here. I also want to point to his experience and resilience, and I touched base on his experience a little bit before, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it now. Now, despite coming off of what you could say is 1 loss and 1 really bad split decision, Kai Kara-France has faced some very top tier competition, and he's demonstrated a lot of resilience and his ability to learn from his past fights. Even though he lost to Brandon Moreno back in 2022, fighting a prime Brandon Moreno or a Brandon Moreno from 2022 is wonderful experience as a fighter. Win or lose, you're going to come out of that fight learning a lot more about yourself and what you need to improve on. And coming out of that fight, you're going to be a more improved fighter because you've picked up on skills. It's almost like you're sparring very intensely with one of the best guys in the division at that time. You are learning as you're fighting. That experience within the octagon is absolutely crucial. He's also fought Cody Garbrandt back in 2021 and he defeated Cody Garbrandt back then. He fought Brandon Royval back in 2020 and he lost in that fight by submission, but again, really good experience against a very quickly up and coming fighter. He faced Brandon Moreno back in 2019. That was their first fight, and he did end up losing that fight, but again, That was a unanimous decision loss. Really good experience in the octagon. That was back in that UFC 245 card. He's also fought guys like Aori Quilang, who we've seen within the division a few times. That was back in 2017. The guys had really good experiences. Total record 24 wins, 11 losses, but 24 wins, 11 of them KO/TKOs. He has a proven record with that striking power. He's had 35 professional fights, and Erceg has only had 14 fights. That's the primary difference here. Kai Kara-France is much more comfortable. He has the home crowd advantage in this fight, and that could play a role in his confidence and his aggression and his ability to overwhelm a guy like Erceg. I'm still leaning towards Erceg because I really liked what I saw in that fight against Pantoja, but if you want some value here, you can't go wrong, in my opinion, by leaning towards a guy like Kai Kara-France or even a guy like Israel Adesanya or Dricus du Plessis. There is a lot of value in this card. A lot of it is on the fighter's side and what they're coming in with in Saturday night, but Kai Kara-France definitely holds value on this card, especially being where he's at on the odds. I think the odds makers, they're not being very kind to Kai Kara-France. He holds a lot of potential, especially with his fighting style, his demeanor. I think he's a little bit of a weaker kryptonite, but he is a little bit of a kryptonite style fighter against Steve Erceg, a more patient, methodical, technical fighter. I also want to point out Kai Kara-France, he trains at City Kickboxing, and that gym is very well known to produce several UFC level champions, including Israel Adesanya himself. So in that environment, he's training with very high level partners, really good coaches, and that is going to be crucial coming into this fight and fighting a guy like Erceg. I think that when it comes to experience and training, Kai Kara-France has the advantage there. I also think that now that he's coming back and he's healed and he's rested and he's going to be fighting near his hometown with the home crowd advantage, that's all going to bleed into his overall motivation and his will to win. And sometimes what you need as a fighter is grit and motivation, and that can add to your durability as a fighter. It does add some motivation. When you get hit, you're quicker to get back up. You want to please the crowd. You want to put on a show. You want to earn your spot. You want to show, hey kid, I know you're Steve Erceg. I know you had a great fight with Alexander Pantoja, but hey, there's levels to this. I've had 35 fights. I know I'm better than you. You have to earn your stripes, kid. So if he comes in with that attitude, in that die-hard willingness to win, which I think he is capable of, then Kai Kara-France holds a really good opportunity and possibility of getting it done here. I really wanted to take my time on those two fights. So the next promising underdog that I want to highlight for you guys, and I'll try to speed this up a little bit for you guys, it's Junior Tafa. Now let's talk stats first. Junior Tafa, he absorbs 2.01 less strikes per minute than his opponent here, and he has a 7% higher striking defense. Now all things considered, I am leaning towards Junior Tafa here. I'm giving him a 50.2% probability of victory, and that's why I think he's a good underdog to feature as well. I know that's very narrow, but that's still leaning towards an underdog, and I think that he holds some value, and I'll tell you why. He's won 5 fights. He's finished all 5 of those fights. He's had 3 UFC fights. He's only won 1 of those 3 UFC fights, but that still gives him some decent experience in the UFC, and he did get that 1 win out of those 3. Now, recently, he's done pretty decent. He's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss, but he's still done pretty well overall. Now, let's talk about stylistically why I'm actually leaning towards Junior Tafa, and I touched base a little bit on this on my prediction video, but I'm going to expand a little bit more here. The first thing I want to highlight is the striking ability of Junior Tafa. He's known for his technical striking and his speed. He has a background in kickboxing, which I think gives him a huge advantage when it comes to stand-up exchanges. Now, he's particularly very effective when it comes to those heavy calf kicks that he implements, and I think that quickly builds up in a fight. It weakens the opponent's mobility and defense, and then he's able to capitalize with heavier shots, aiming for the head, looking for the finish. Now, I also want to point to his fighting style and his overall strategy. Tafa is probably going to focus on keeping the fight standing. That's no surprise. That's where he excels as a fighter. We have to respect his striking power. All 5 of his professional MMA fights that we've talked about, they came via KO or TKO finish. So if the fight remains on the feet, Tafa does have a really good chance of securing that victory through his striking skills. Now, he also has pretty good takedown defense for a guy in his division and just a guy of his skill set. He has decent takedown defense. He has a pretty high success rate. I think it's about 80%, and he's able to prevent his opponents from taking him to the ground and controlling him. He's very strong, even though he kind of has an interesting body shape. You know, he has a pretty relatively high body fat percentage, but he's still very strong as a fighter. He's not someone that you can just lay down flat and, oh, they're doomed. We've seen that a lot with heavyweights or guys that are of heavier weight in the UFC. He's not one of those fighters. He uses takedown defense really well. He's good at keeping the fight standing, and I think that that's key. Now, I do want to say that Walter Walker does have the size advantage here, and he has a really good grappling game, which is why the odds are favoring him. But I think that there's certain things that the odds makers are not focusing on, and that would be Tafa's striking skills, his speed, and his takedown defense, which are going to be key in this fight. So if he can keep the fight standing, and I am leaning towards him keeping the fight standing, I think he's going to be able to capitalize on his striking opportunities, get the job done, and ultimately give us a lot of value for where he's at. So the next promising underdog that I want to highlight for all of you guys on this card is Ricardo Ramos. Ricardo Ramos is a year younger than his opponent here. He lands a little bit more strikes per minute, and he has a slightly better striking defense as well. He has a 5% higher takedown defense, and he lands 0.4 more submissions on average. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Ricardo Ramos a 42% probability of victory, and that's considering stats and everything outside of stats as well, research, fight film studying, all of that stuff combined. 42%, not bad at all for an underdog. Definitely some value available there. Now, let's talk about his record. Ramos has won 16 fights. He's finished 69% of them. And here's what's important. He's had 12 UFC fights, and he's won 7 of those 12 UFC fights. He has really good UFC experience and a pretty decent winning rate as well, over half. Now, recently, I got to be honest with you guys, he hasn't done too well, which is why I am leaning towards his opponent after all. But he has still won 2 of his last 5 fights. Now, he does have potential, and I'll tell you why, especially when it comes to things outside of statistics. He is a black belt in BJJ. Let's keep that in mind. He has several submission wins, and time again, he has demonstrated that he has good grappling skills, which could exploit someone like Coulibao's recent struggles against grapplers, and I think that that is a little bit of a kryptonite on Coulibao's style and his strengths and weaknesses. Now, Ramos does have better professional experience. He has a strong record when it comes to the number of fights and his experience overall. So again, Ramos is a BJJ black belt. He has great grappling abilities, and I think that those submission skills will be a significant advantage in this matchup, especially when you consider that Coulibao has struggled with grapplers in the past. So Ramos, he definitely has the opportunity to control the fight on the ground, take it to the ground, continue to control the fight, and then look for that submission victory if he can avoid being caught in something like a guillotine choke, which recently we saw, he's been vulnerable against. So he also, as a fighter, stepping away from grappling for a quick second, he does have striking versatility too. He has this weird, unpredictable striking style, including some of those weird spinning attacks that we've seen. So I think that versatility could create some potential openings for takedowns or clinch work, or even putting a little bit of damage on Coulibao or disrupting his rhythm and kind of keeping him off balance. I think for this fight, the key is that Ramos has the ability to mix up his attacks and use his striking to set up some of his takedowns, and if he's able to do that and take the fight to the ground, that's where his advantage is really going to shine. So if you think that Coulibao does have that weakness, and you agree that once the fight is taken to the ground, Coulibao's not going to be as advantageous as the odds makers are thinking, then you will also see the value in Ricardo Ramos, and you could kind of lean on him. Now, I think that Coulibao is going to do a really good job of avoiding that from happening. So again, if I'm giving Ramos a 42% probability of victory, that means that I'm giving Coulibao a 58% probability of victory. So very important to keep in mind who I'm leaning towards, but I'm still highlighting value for you guys. That's the whole point of this video. I think that Ramos does hold value when it comes to strategy, statistics, and his style as a fighter. Now, when it comes to the underdogs, I'm going to wrap it up with the next promising underdog and the last one before I jump into the favorites, and then before I jump into the bets here. The next fight I want to highlight for you guys is Casey O'Neill. Now, Casey O'Neill, she has a reach advantage of 2 inches in this matchup. She also lands 3.08 more strikes than her opponent in this matchup. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Casey O'Neill a 44.4% probability of victory, and that's very close to being 50-50. I think she's a good underdog on this card. And let's talk about her record, and then I'll talk about her fighting style and the advantages that she holds in being able to pull off a victory here. So O'Neill has won 9 fights. She's finished 56% of them. She's had 6 UFC fights, and won 4 of those. So she's won a good amount of her UFC fights. She's recently won 3 out of her last 5. Now she is coming off of back-to-back losses here, which do play a role into why I'm leaning towards her opponent, but she still has a good opportunity of getting it done and coming out a victor in this fight, almost 50-50. The simple truth of the matter is that Casey O'Neill, I think she has more experience when it comes to not only the UFC, but fights in general, and she has faced tougher opponents than Luana Santos has. I like her superior striking skills compared to Luana Santos, and I think that her improved grappling, it kind of makes her a bit of a dual threat when it comes to the stand-up exchanges and the ground exchanges. She also has really good cardio, which I think will allow her to maintain a very high pace in this fight. And she, if the fight ends up going into the later rounds or the third round, I think that she has an opportunity to potentially outlast Santos. Also, when it comes to fight IQ, she's a fighter that does have a decent fight IQ, and she's able to adapt to different strategies and methodologies mid-fight, and she does that really effectively as a fighter. I like her aggressive style, and that could put Santos on the defensive, while she also has the reach advantage, and that could help her control the distance as well. O'Neill is also mentally tough, and she's resilient as a fighter, and if she's able to stay composed under some of the pressure coming into this pay-per-view, she could be a challenging opponent for Santos for sure. I'm still leaning towards Santos. I think she's more likely to win in this fight when you speak about logic. But if you're looking for value and you're looking for the potential for upsets, I think that Casey O'Neill definitely has the potential to pull off an upset in this fight. All right, now we're going to switch gears, and now I'm going to talk about the promising favorites for this card, which I've chosen through 3 main criteria. First, they have a high statistical weighted confidence either through my prediction models or through fighter stat evaluation or some combination of both. Second, their opponent does not have a high probability of victory, so you're not going to notice any overlap between the underdogs I just showed you earlier and these fighters. And the third thing is that their odds aren't too expensive. If a fighter has like -600 or -700 odds, they're obviously just too expensive to pick, but you could always parlay them if you want. In this video, I'm going to focus more on finding you guys some value rather than just stating some obvious picks and pointing out those -600 type fighters. So I consider these 3 things for you guys, I do all the work for you guys, and then I show you the valuable picks that fit that criteria. And if you want to know how I predict each fight plays out and the results, please check out my prediction breakdown from earlier this week where I review stats, each fighter's fight history, the results of my 7 data science prediction models, my final picks, and the method of victory. Now for this portion of the video, for these favorites, I'm only going to review their stat differentials that they have against their opponent. But again, if you want those in-depth breakdowns, please refer to that video from earlier this week. It will help you out. So again, for these fighters, I'm just going to fire off their statistical advantages. If you do want to break down as to why I'm going for them, please check out that prediction video, but I'm going to keep this really quick so then we can jump into the bets. So the first inexpensive and confident favorite that I'm going for in this fight and that I really like statistically and qualitative wise and even stylistically, it's Mateusz Gamrot. Now Gamrot is a 1 year younger fighter than his opponent here. He has a 3% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 1.69 less strikes per minute. He has a 8% higher striking defense. He lands 4.49 more takedowns on average, which is huge. He has a 1% higher takedown accuracy and a 10% higher takedown defense. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He holds a lot of statistical advantages and stylistic advantages. And so all things considered, I am giving Mateusz Gamrot a 67% probability of victory, and I think is a great favorite to feature on this card. He has a very high level wrestling skill set. He averages a bunch of takedowns and he's able to implement them in his game plan very well. He has a very good ability to maintain a high pace when it comes to fights, and he utilizes his excellent cardio perfectly when it comes to executing his game plan. I also really like his proficiency when it comes to submission grappling, and I think that he's just one of those fighters that's a consistent threat both on the ground and in those transitional scramble type phases. He's just a very well-rounded fighter, and he's able to do well when it comes to utilizing his grappling as an advantage. So the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you all is Rozenstruik. Now Rozenstruik has a reach advantage of 3 inches in this fight. He absorbs 2.27 less strikes per minute. He has a 4% higher striking defense, and he has an 18% higher takedown defense. He has a lot of advantages, not only when it comes to his style, the stats, but also momentum. His opponent here has not done very well, so I expect Rozenstruik to kind of continue his momentum and his strengths and utilize them very properly early in this fight. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Rozenstruik a 63.3% probability of victory, and that's incorporating stats, fight film studying, research, everything and anything combined. 63.3% probability of victory. I would go as far as to say that Rozenstruik is one of the most technical kickboxers when it comes to the heavyweight division. I really like the significant power that he uses when it comes to fighting, and he uses it very technically and very well. He's not just someone who throws wild shots. He is aggressive when he needs to be, and he's very methodical when he needs to be. And that is key, especially in this division where guys exhaust themselves time and time again early on. It's really those more technical heavyweights that do better in the long run. I also like his ability to avoid some of those big strikes and those haymakers and those wild swings that guys in this division throw, and that makes him a very challenging opponent when it comes to stand-up exchanges. For all those reasons and several more, I'm leaning towards Rozenstruik. So the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you guys is Carlos Prates, and I hope I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. I'm trying to work better on that pronunciation, but bear with me here. It's Carlos. So Carlos has a height advantage here of an inch in this matchup. He's 6 years younger than his opponent. He has a reach advantage of 7 inches, and he has a 10% higher striking accuracy, and he also has a 20% higher takedown defense. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Carlos a 64.4% probability of victory, and I think he holds several advantages in this fight. I really like his powerful and his precise striking when it comes to utilizing his game plan. He's really leaned into his background of Muay Thai and perfected it, which makes him one of the best strikers in this welterweight division. I like his ability to maintain a very high pace in fights, and the rhythm that he keeps during fights. It really plays into his advantage as a fighter. He has a great reach advantage in this fight over, and in general, over many opponents within this division, and I think that, coupled with his improved ground game over time and his takedown defense, he's a really solid fighter that you can't go wrong with backing. So all things considered, 64.4% probability of victory for Carlos in this fight. For the next inexpensive and confident favorite that I want to highlight for you all, it is going to be Song Kenan. So Song Kenan, he is a year younger than his opponent here. He has a reach advantage of an inch. He lands 0.42 more strikes per minute. He has a 3% higher striking accuracy and a 37% higher takedown accuracy. Now, all things considered, I'm giving Song a 63.1% probability of victory, and I think he's a very solid fighter and a solid favorite in this card. Now, to keep it simple, Song is really good when it comes to his striking skills. He uses a multitude of different punches and kicks in his game plan, and that kind of gives him the advantage when it comes to keeping his opponents at a certain distance in order for him to deliver some powerful shots. He's very rangy and he's good with his striking, and overall, I really like him as a favorite on this card. Now, the next case I'm about to make is probably the weakest of this favorite of this group of favorites, but it's going to be Stuart Nicole. Now, Stuart, he does have a height advantage of an inch here, and when I reviewed everything that I possibly could on the guy, I ended up giving him a 65.7% probability of victory. We don't really know much about him or a lot about his previous fight, so I'd be a little bit careful. You know, he's early on in this card, so I do want to caution you guys, but it is all about finding value, and you know, sometimes you got to roll the dice a little bit. I do like Stuart and what he brings into the octagon. I like his fighting style overall. I mean, he's really good at, you know, kind of controlling the pace when it comes to fights and dictating the range a little bit, using his striking skills. He has a good record, although some would argue that it's a bit padded up, like someone mentioned in the previous video's comment section, which is totally fair, so be a little bit cautious with this kid. But he's not a bad fighter if you want to roll the dice a little bit, take a little bit of risk to try to earn a little bit more when it comes to picking a money line or something. I would be a little careful. I wouldn't really throw him in a parlay because he could be one of those fighters that ruins your parlay, so be a little bit cautious with this kid. But I did want to mention Stuart Nicole. I do like the potential that he has and some of the foundation that he has as a fighter for now. Now let's review the bets that I think have value for this card and have a good statistical and stylistic possibility of happening. Please disregard prop bets where you're picking the other fighter to win. I'll start from the top of the card and work my way down. You'll see that I've laid out a few options for you guys depending on how risk averse you are and how much risk you're willing to take. So, starting from the top of the card, the main event, for Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, I would consider taking Adesanya via KO/TKO, or you could take du Plessis if you're leaning towards him via decision or KO/TKO. I don't like any of the round prop bets for this fight because we really don't know what we can expect. But if we're talking about the methodology of victory, I really like Adesanya getting that KO/TKO or du Plessis via decision or KO/TKO. If you want to play it a little bit neutral, I guess you could take the fight not going the distance if you think that du Plessis does have that KO/TKO power. But keep in mind, championship level Adesanya is a little bit careful and cautious. We don't know what side of him we're going to get. But moving along, for the co-main event, Kai Kara-France versus Steve Erceg, I would take Erceg via decision, or you could take the fight going over 1.5, 2.5, or going the distance depending on how risky you want to be with that. But those are the ones that I like for that co-main event. I think that stylistically and logically that's likely to play out. Now, for the next fight, Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker, I would consider taking Gamrot via decision, or you could also take the over 1.5 or over 2.5. Now, for Tai Tuivasa versus Rosenstreich, I would consider taking Tuivasa versus KO/TKO if you think that he has a good chance of getting it done there, or if you want to throw some money there. I know he's entertaining, he's a people's favorite, so if you want to take a little bit of risk, Tuivasa via KO/TKO holds some value. Otherwise, if you want to be a little more logical, you could take Rosenstreich via KO/TKO. In the press conference, he did say he's going to be a little bit aggressive in this fight, and he's not looking to bore fans, so keep that in mind. I don't think that fight's going to go the distance, so you could take that fight, not go in the distance. You could take the under 2.5 or even under 1.5, again, depending on how risky you want to do it. If you want to give yourself some breathing room, you could just take the fight, not go in the distance. And if you think that, hey, this is going to be a first round banger, you could take that under 1.5. Anyways, moving along, Li Jingliang versus Carlos Prates or Prates, or however the heck you want to pronounce his last name. I would take Carlos via KO/TKO, or even Li via KO/TKO. I think Li does have a little bit of knockout power, so keep that in mind. If Li were to win, and I know the chances are very slim, he would get the KO/TKO if he were to win. So there is value in that if you like Lee's game plan. He is returning after a long time. He has suffered an injury, so chances are a little bit slim there. I'm just being very honest with you guys. I don't think that fight's going the distance, so you could take the fight, not go in the distance if you want to give yourself some breathing room. Otherwise, take the under 2.5 or under 1.5. Moving along, we are rapid firing these. Junior Tafa versus Walter Walker. Consider taking Tafa via KO/TKO, or I really like the fight not go in the distance, or the under 2.5 or under 1.5 for that fight. When you talk about style, when you talk about what's logically probably going to happen in that fight, that's where to go. So continuing, we have Josh Culibao versus Ricardo Ramos. I'll consider taking Culibao versus decision, or even the over 1.5, 2.5 distance. Now, again, if you want to give yourself some breathing room, it's the 1.5. If you want to roll the dice a little bit, 2.5. And if you want to, get the best bang for your buck, you got it going the distance, kind of calling that. But give yourself some breathing room here. So anyways, continuing, Jack Jenkins versus Herbert Burns. I would consider taking Jenkins via KO/TKO, or the fight not go in the distance. And again, you could also take the under 2.5, under 1.5 if you want to play it a little bit aggressively. Then we have Tom Nolan versus Alex Reyes. I would consider taking Nolan via KO/TKO, or the fight not go in the distance. And again, if you want to play it aggressive, you could do the under 2.5, under 1.5 if you're feeling confident in that fight. Next, we have Song Kenan versus Ricky Glenn. I would take Song via KO/TKO. I really like his knockout power. I don't like any other bets for that particular fight, so I'm going to move on. For Stuart Nicole versus Jesus Aguilar, I would consider Nicole via decision. You could also take the over 1.5 if you want to give yourself some breathing space here, or you could take the over 2.5 or even go in the distance if you feel some confidence that neither of those guys will be able to get the finish there. Lastly, for Casey O'Neill versus Luana Santos, I would consider taking Santos via decision or submission, however you think she's going to likely get it done. Both of them are very likely. It just depends on what you're leaning towards. I like both of those. I don't like any other bets for that fight. So I hope you guys really enjoyed these bets. I hope all of the information I shared with you, at least some of it, you can use for your picks, for your bets, or even just for entertainment. If you're someone who likes to listen about fights, I implore you to stay on the channel, give the content a chance, engage in the comment sections. I know I'm a little bit rusty. I just started this whole thing this year. It's been a few months. I was terrible in the beginning, and I'm starting to get better and better and more confident. You guys have been very encouraging and supportive. I always appreciate that. I'm literally nothing without you guys, so you guys are keeping this whole thing afloat. So much love to you guys. I really appreciate it. See you guys in the next one. Let's all get hyped for UFC 305. I can't be excited enough. We have one more sleep, and then we have an absolute banger of a card. Great crowd. It's going to be amazing. UFC 305. Thank you guys once again. See you guys next time. And with that said, that wraps up this video. I really appreciate you all for watching and being so supportive as always. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and check out that Patreon if you want to support me through there as well. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which includes early results, picks, and bets, and also includes premium data, analysis, and stats as well. Your support helps keep me encouraged and motivated to continue running all of this data and analysis for you guys and providing you guys all these insights. So thank you once again, and as always, see you guys in the next one.